Welcome to Non-Human Entities YouTube channel. Please subscribe, like, and share if you enjoy this show.
Hello.
Good evening. This is Michael Vera with Late Night in the Midlands. How are you? Is this Mr. Cremo?
Yes, it is. This is Michael Cremo.
Well, hello, Michael. How are you tonight?
Oh, I'm fine.
Well, great. We are live, and I do thank you so much for being a part of the show, and I'm looking forward to talking with you tonight.
I'm looking forward to talking to you and all your listeners.
Well, great. So it's been a little while since you've been on the show. So what's new? What's new in the world of archaeology?
Well, I'm working on a new book. I'm calling it More Forbidden Archaeology, and I'm going to be including in it some of the cases that have recently come to my attention. Oh. As you know, my work is basically about archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity, evidence showing that humans like us have existed on Earth for longer periods of time than most archaeologists are now prepared to accept. Mostly, they say, in the textbooks, humans like us first appeared less than 200,000 years ago. So I've been interested in archaeological discoveries showing that humans like us have been present for far longer than 200,000 years. In some cases, the discoveries go back millions of years. And one of them that came to my attention recently was a discovery that was announced in 2015. A team of archaeologists headed by Manuel Dominguez Rodrigo uncovered an interesting fossil bone at Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania in East Africa. Many important discoveries have been made there. Now, this one was a relatively minor one in one sense. What they found was a finger bone, and it was found in layers of sediments that were dated using the potassium-argon method as being 1,840,000 years old.
Wow.
So they studied this finger bone very carefully. They measured it. They compared the measurements to the measurements of finger bones of various kinds of apes and monkeys, like chimpanzees, gorillas, macaques, which are a kind of monkey, orangutans, baboons. And they also compared this finger bone to various kinds of ape men, Australopithecus, Homo habilis, Homo erectus. And they also compared the finger bone they found with a sample of modern human finger bones. And the archaeologists found that the finger bone they found in 2015 at Olduvai Gorge fit within the modern human group, and it didn't fit inside the measurements of any of the apes and monkeys or various kinds of ape men. So they said in their scientific report, this finger bone is just like that of modern Homo sapiens, but we can't call it Homo sapiens because of its age. According to their theories, Homo sapiens didn't exist at that time. Modern Homo sapiens, according to their current dominant paradigm, came into existence less than 200,000 years ago. So it's a perfect example of what I call forbidden archaeology. Archaeologists find something that is definitely human, but they say it can't be human because it's too old.
Which is ridiculous, obviously. So, in other words, we get cheated on the truth, basically, because they're not willing to go beyond what? Was it a belief system or a pay system?
Well, there's a lot of things that you could call it. There was a philosopher of science named Thomas Kuhn who wrote a very influential book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He was interested in how science operates, and he said that what we call normal science operates under the influence of a paradigm, a commitment to certain basic concepts and practices. And today, most scientists operating in the field of human origins are operating under a paradigm that is evolutionary. They believe in the Darwinian theory of evolution. That's their paradigm, and according to that paradigm, humans like us appeared fairly recently on this planet, less than 200,000 years ago. And they believe that before that, there were only more ape-like human ancestors. They don't think there were any humans like us any more than 200,000 years ago. So that's one of their commitments.
But now, wouldn't they have to prove that if that's what, I mean, they're teaching this to our kids in school, so they always talk about this missing link, but it seems like guys like yourself have found these so-called missing links in who we are and how long we've been here, and they want to ignore it.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. But in other words, it's very difficult for them to recognize anomalies, things that contradict their paradigm. And in his book, Thomas Kuhn wrote about a very interesting psychological experiment that was done. There were some psychologists, and they were doing experiments that show how our preconceptions can influence our perceptions of things. So what they did is they made a special deck of cards. You have your normal deck of 52 cards, but they introduced some changes into some of the cards. For example, a 6 of hearts, which is normally red, they turned black. Or a 4 of spades, which is normally black, they turned red. So they showed people the cards in this deck, one after another, and they asked, do you see anything wrong? And nobody saw anything wrong because their belief system just overpowered their ability to see something wrong. So sometimes scientists are victims of the same thing, and I think this example from 2015 is a perfect example of it. They saw something that looked human. According to all their detailed measurements, this finger bone was identical to an anatomically modern human bone, but they couldn't recognize it at that because of their commitment to their paradigm. So these paradigms act as what I call a knowledge filter. Things that fit the paradigm, that meet the expectations, pass through the filter very easily, and they make their way into the textbooks of archaeology. They get talked about at scientific conferences and so on. But things that radically contradict the paradigm either get dismissed completely or somehow or other they're just made to fit somehow. They're reinterpreted. Just like a person might look at the black 6 of hearts card and think there's nothing wrong with it when really it should be red.
Yeah.
So there have been some psychological experiments that show the power of preconceptions that people have. They can override their actual perceptions. And this does happen, unfortunately, in science. If it just happened in 1 or 2 cases in archaeology, then Well, maybe you could overlook it and say, okay, they've made a few misjudgments here and there, but when it happens systematically, time and time again, over the course of many years, so that you wind up with hundreds of these discoveries of anatomically modern human bones and anatomically modern human artifacts and anatomically modern human footprints being either misunderstood or actively suppressed, then you've got to ask yourself what's going on. Actually, my book, Forbidden Archaeology, my original book, is over 900 pages long. It contains hundreds of these cases of archaeological anomalies showing extreme human antiquity. And it's some of the discoveries were made in the last century or the 19th century, and some of them are being made right up to the present moment. As I was mentioning in this case of the finger bone discovered at Olduvai Gorge. The year before that, in 2014, archaeologists found dozens of footprints on the shore of England at a place called Happisburgh on the coast of England, the east coast of England. And they carefully studied the footprints. They carefully measured their length and width, and they found that the footprints measurements were equivalent to the measurements of footprints of living human populations. For example, they were the same measurements as footprints from living Eskimo populations or Native American Indian populations. So they were looking at these footprints. They were found in layers of sediments 900,000 years old.
Wow.
And they noted they're completely human, but they could not bring themselves to call them Homo sapiens. They assigned them to an ape man that they believe was living in Europe 900,000 years ago. They call it Homo antecessor. So it's another case of the theoretical preconceptions influencing how scientists see and categorize evidence that comes to their attention.
And I guess this could be considered a stupid question, but how does these types of discoveries not make it into some sort of mainstream? How come somebody's not sneaking it in there and letting people see? I mean, sure you are, but you're not going to see Fox News or CNN broadcasting any of this stuff, and I think that that's where it needs to be, so people could see that what the truth is here.
Well, not up to the present moment in any case, but it was interesting. Some years ago, NBC did a television special called The Mysterious Origins of Man that featured some of my work from Forbidden Archaeology and some of the work of others in the alternative history field. This was in 1996, so they did air a documentary that did feature some of these cases, and the scientific community was outraged. They tried to organize boycotts of the sponsors of the show because it was shown on Sunday night in prime time on NBC, one of the major television networks. And they were outraged that this was happening because they're able to control the minds of the students in the education system when they've got them in their classrooms. But they were very upset that they might go home and turn on the television and see something that completely contradicted what they were learning in the classroom. So these scientists, they actually went to the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, and they tried to get the FCC to investigate NBC, censure NBC fine NBC millions of dollars for having done this. Now, I'm happy to say they didn't succeed in doing any of that, but these attempts were made, and I've documented this in my book, Forbidden Archaeology's Impact. You can see all the documentation of these attempts. So, in some cases, you do see some of this breaking through into mainstream media outlets, but not very often.
Right. And that's a good point you bring up, because they do that.
So thank God for you.
Well, yeah. Thank God for me and for other shows like this who do put this stuff out there, because that's one of the things they do. They do go after the sponsors. I've had my sponsors threatened before. Honestly, I'm sure a lot of different people and different shows have gone through that. Where if you're covering something they don't like, well, right away they try to get you in trouble in any way they can, and it's amazing. And I can imagine what they do to something like a big station like that. I mean, you've got some serious sponsors, and of course that pulls a lot of weight. That's why it's good to be listener supported, folks. But, Michael, another question I had here, because I had read this, might have been a month or two ago, in the news, that modern humans, they now think, might have interbred with, Neanderthals. And, I mean, there's a million jokes there, right? And I've actually thrown a few of them out there. But what's your thoughts on that? I mean, has there been some interbreeding? And in your opinion, how far back would you say the human race actually goes?
Well, I mean, the answer to your last question is, I think the evidence for a human presence on this planet goes back millions and millions of years, right to the very beginnings of the history of life on Earth. As far as, now I don't deny the existence of the various kinds of ape men, the Neanderthals, the Homo erectus, the Homo habilis, and creatures of that sort. But alongside them, human beings like us have existed. And this is something I've been saying for a long time, that the basic picture, if you look at all of the evidence, is one of coexistence rather than evolution. Some years ago, most scientists believed that there was only one hominin, human-like species existing at one time. They thought there was a linear line where you go from Homo erectus to Neanderthal to early Homo sapiens to modern Homo sapiens. But when I wrote Forbidden Archaeology, which was published back in 1993, I was saying at that time, no, that's not the actual picture. At various times in history, there were several human-like species existing at the same time. So now they're kind of coming around to that idea. They're not pushing it as far back in time as I believe is actually true. But they are starting to come around to this idea that different species of human-like creatures were existing. So that's why you could have Neanderthals mating with anatomically modern humans. They believe this happened. The recent discovery that they were talking about came from a DNA analysis of a fossil bone of a Neanderthal that was found in a cave in Siberia in the Altai Mountains, which is on the border between Siberia, which is part of Russia, and Mongolia. So they detected a little bit of anatomically modern human DNA in that Neanderthal bone in its genome, and on that basis they concluded this Neanderthal must have been mating, not that Neanderthal, but its ancestors had been mating with anatomically modern humans. So this might also show, which something that I've been saying for a while, is that Neanderthals were more human-like than scientists once believed. They used to believe they were kind of hulking creatures, with very low intelligence and stooped shoulders and low foreheads and big, huge eyebrows. But apparently, the more recent research is showing they were more human-like than that.
Well, and not being funny, but there are a lot of people today that I see who have those characteristics.
That's right, and that's why some people are saying, and I might agree with them to some extent, that you really can't distinguish between, you can't really make a clear distinction between today's humans and these Neanderthals. If you want to say that a low forehead and big eye ridges above the eye sockets is a characteristic of a different species, while there are living humans today who have those same characteristics. So, but my main point is that humans and human-like creatures, humans like us, go back very far in time, many, many, many millions of years.
Yeah. And so now I also heard that they've actually, in caves, there's drawings like from back in the, and it shows like cavemen with dinosaurs and stuff. And if we found stuff like that, I mean, wouldn't that obviously indicate that back when, dinosaurs were here, so were mankind?
Well, there are some cases like that. One of the famous ones is the Ica stones from Peru, which were found by Dr. Cabrera near a town called Ica in Peru. They call them Ica stones. They're round stones, and they have carvings on them, and some of the carvings show humans and creatures that are clearly dinosaurs. So you could say, well, that's evidence that human beings were existing at the same time as dinosaurs. Now, as far as I'm concerned, what would really clinch it if it could be shown exactly where these stones come from, because things are discovered in certain layers of rock, and if you can show that those layers of rock are over 65 million years old, scientists believe the dinosaurs went extinct about 65 million years ago. So the thing that would really clinch it with these stones, which have carvings showing humans together with dinosaurs, is if you could go to the places where they were found and show that they definitely come from strata, sediments that date back to the time of the dinosaurs. In other words, that are over 65 million years old. Now, the problem was that Dr. Cabrera never really revealed the exact places where he made these discoveries, so it hasn't been possible to check on the geology of the sites. But in principle, I'm definitely prepared to accept that humans existed at the same time of the dinosaurs over 65 million years ago. And there are some places, like there's a place here in the United States, near Glen Rose, Texas. There's a small river called the Paluxy River. And in that area, they've done excavations. They've stripped away the different layers of rock, and they can see in them footprints of dinosaurs, and along some of the dinosaur footprints are footprints that look like those that would be made by a human being, with 5 short toes, a long foot, a heel, the ball of the foot. And I've sometimes, when I was doing my early research for forbidden archaeology, I was a little bit skeptical of these things. But as time has gone on and I've seen more of the research about these footprints, I'm prepared to accept that there you've got some really good evidence showing that humans did exist at the same time as the dinosaurs.
Yeah, I would say that is pretty good evidence. And, and I guess when you first start something like this, you're probably looking to prove otherwise. And then you start going down some rabbit holes, and it's like, wow, wait a minute here. Now what about, being that they lie so much and that they keep so much from us, I guess it's possible that there could be some kind of ancient human that's still walking the earth, like a Bigfoot. And again, I'm not trying to make light of the whole archaeological ordeal, but it's something that I know listeners often ask about. And so have you come across any type of evidence that would maybe indicate that something like this is actually still walking the earth?
Yes, and in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, I have a whole chapter on evidence for living ape men. Because what I've been proposing is that just as in ancient times we coexisted, by saying we, I mean humans like us, anatomically modern humans, coexisted with various kinds of ape men. And I think we still are coexisting with them because you have reports from wilderness areas all over the world where people, including scientists, have cited some of these creatures. They have different names for them in different parts of the world. In the northwestern part of the United States and southwestern Canada, they call them Sasquatch or Bigfoot. There have been sightings in Central Asian mountains like the Himalayas and the Altai Mountains. There they call them Almas, or Yeti. So from all various parts of the world, you do get evidence like this. Actually, there was a British scientist, an anthropologist named Myra Shackley. She collected a lot of this evidence and put it in a book, published a scientific book about it. So it's not that just the kind of people that would maybe write something for a tabloid newspaper are concerned about these things. There have been a few scientists who've actually looked into this topic and concluded that there is substantial evidence for living ape men.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's interesting, and some people speculate that they have some technology of some sort that they're able to blend in. So I guess the next question would be: is there any indication that some of our ancient ancestors may have been a little smarter and playing with a little better tools than they're given credit for?
Well, I think so. Of course, there are different sources of evidence about the past. One is what you can find in the layers of the rocks, the record of the rocks, and the other is what you can find in the records left by different ancient civilizations. For example, I have done quite a bit of study in the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, and they contain human histories that go back millions and millions of years. And in these ancient histories, we find accounts of spaceships. They were called vimanas, and we also find descriptions of highly developed civilizations with vast cities And also we find accounts of weapons, some of them resembling modern nuclear weapons. So sometimes we think that advanced technology is something that was invented just within the past couple of hundred years. But the records of some of these ancient civilizations indicate that in previous times they also had these things.
Yeah, so we're not, we're reinventing things today, maybe not so much inventing them.
Like there's, like America developed an atomic bomb during World War II. There was a physicist in charge of that project. His name was Dr. Robert Oppenheimer. In addition to being a nuclear physicist, he was also a student of the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. And he had encountered in those writings some of the accounts of these weapons. They were called brahmastras. Some of the descriptions about the effects of these weapons said it would be like you had 1 million suns all together in one place, putting off tremendous amounts of energy and heat. So when Dr. Robert Oppenheimer was present when the first American atomic bomb was tested in the deserts outside Alamogordo, New Mexico in 1945, he was in the bunker, and when he saw the blast go off, he began reciting verses in the Sanskrit language from these ancient Sanskrit texts, describing the effects of these weapons. So he was asked by a reporter later, what was it like to be present when the first atomic bomb was set off? And he said, the first in modern times. So it's like you're saying, a lot of what we're doing today may be just reinventing things that were there previously.
And I wonder if the powers that be, if they understand that they're reinventing this stuff. I mean, are they finding things, I don't know, and reverse engineering some of this stuff? I mean, it's just kind of strange how, they were able to do these things so many years ago, and now all of a sudden, hey, we just got this idea and we do it exactly the same.
Well, it is interesting. Some people have talked about extraterrestrial technology transfer. There are suggestions that there have been crashed UFOs and that our scientists have gotten a hold of that technology and back engineered it. There's a book written about that by a man named Colonel Corso, who was an American military officer who worked for a lot of different government agencies. I think at one point he was part of the National Security Council, working in connection with the White House. And he published a book, Colonel Corso did, where he said that that's exactly what happened. Like our computers, they're based on miniaturized electronics that were found in a crashed UFO. And a lot of our current technology was back engineered, as you say, from that. I mean, of course, you always hear conspiracy theories, but you always wonder, well, somebody who was involved should step forward and say it. That would make it much more credible than explanations after the fact. So I was always very fascinated with Colonel Corso's work, because apparently he was such a person, a government official, a military man who was involved in these things, who did step forward. So, but I think there is a long history of these things on this planet, as I've said, I've studied the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, especially the Puranas, which are the histories. And in one of them, the Bhagavat Purana, there's an account of a king on Earth who got a spaceship from an extraterrestrial and used it in a battle on this planet. So this extraterrestrial technology transfer is something that may have been going on for a long time.
Yeah, that's actually something I was going to bring up about this supposed, alleged spaceship being captured, being used. And, it makes sense to me. We've had this surge of technology, I guess, since, the 80s. It's probably before that. But, I remember a surge. I went from compact disc players for our movies to VCRs to CD players. It's like in no time, and on a much bigger scale. What we're able to do now is incredible. Even with biology, there's things they're doing they're not even telling us, and you gotta wonder. It's not that I want to take credit away from the human being and say we're not smart enough to figure these things out. But boy, it just came in such a wave that it's almost like they say, "Oh wow, we finally figured this out," and then from it, they've just been advancing so much.
Yeah, well, I think in one sense, another thing that might be happening is we are using our modern technology to duplicate powers that humans once exercised naturally, like things like remote viewing, telepathy. In other words, people may have once been able to make use to a greater extent than they do today to their natural human psychic powers. They could communicate with other people at a distance simply by their brain waves, by communicating telepathically or astrally, or they would have remote viewing. And these things are real abilities that people have. There have been many studies done in remote viewing and telepathy. There have been scientific studies demonstrating that people have these abilities. So a lot of our technologies today, like our smartphones and televisions and computers, our advanced communication systems, may be our attempt to duplicate and through technology that can be marketed and sold and be used to control people, rather than allowing them to naturally develop these same powers.
Well, there's a part of me that thinks at this point that it's almost been intentional to, throughout the centuries, wipe away these abilities from us. And I agree with you that I think we once naturally had all these abilities. You read in different ancient texts about people who were able to do these things. They were getting messages from somewhere. They called it God or what have you, but nevertheless, they were getting psychic messages, and these messages were right on with whoever was talking to them. And so much more. That's just minor compared. And it's like nowadays, it's almost like it's been intentionally wiped away from our gene pool or something. Like the DNA might have been tampered with.
Yeah, but even the United States government, the military and the various intelligence services at one point or another have admitted they've used psychic powers. They've used people with remote viewing capabilities. They've spent millions of dollars on projects related to that. And maybe you've probably had as a guest on your show at one point or another some of the people that were actually involved in those government remote viewing projects.
I have talked to different people who have made some pretty interesting claims, and I have no doubt again that people can do the remote viewing. the psychic abilities. I think all that's real. I just don't believe everybody who says they can do it. But
right, yeah, but just like with money, there may be some counterfeit $100 bills, but that doesn't mean every $100 bill is a counterfeit one.
Oh, that's right. That's right. So, psychics sometimes assist archaeologists, then, is what I understand. Then, so not only I've heard of the police department using them, obviously radio shows love them, but apparently archaeologists like them too. I mean, that's proof. If they're able to go and give some accurate information, that leads to a find, right?
Yeah, actually, there are cases like that where archaeologists have made use of psychics in their research. That is a fact.
Very interesting. What would you say? Maybe a few of the biggest finds that we might not see in the conventional mainstream scientific type communities. But in your opinion, what are maybe a few, 2 or 3 of the biggest finds, and why they're so big?
Well, one that I've really found fascinating is the California gold mine discoveries. During the gold rush days in the 19th century, miners went to California to get the gold, and they were digging tunnels into the sides of mountains like Table Mountain in the Sierra Nevada mountains near Sonora in Tuolumne County. And deep inside those tunnels, the miners were finding human bones and human artifacts. And these discoveries came to the attention of Dr. J.D. Whitney, who was the chief government geologist of California. And he collected all of these things, and he wrote a report about them that was published by Harvard University. Not just a simple report, it was actually a book called The Auriferous Gravels of the Sierra Nevada Mountains of California, in which he laid out all of these discoveries of human bones and human artifacts in the mines in the California gold mining region. And what makes these things so interesting to me is that the human bones and the human artifacts were found in layers of rock that modern geologists tell us are about 50 million years old. So according to the standard view of things, 50 million years is before the time of the first apes and monkeys even. So you've got evidence that humans like us were present at that time. And, but you're not going to see these things mentioned in the textbooks today because of the process of knowledge filtration that I was talking about a little bit earlier in the show. So there was a scientist named William Holmes. He was an anthropologist at the Smithsonian Institution in Washington, D.C. And what he said was, well, if Dr. Whitney, the scientist who reported these things, if Dr. Whitney had understood the theory of human evolution, then he wouldn't have announced those discoveries. In other words, if the facts did not fit the theory, then the facts should be discarded, cast into oblivion. And basically, that's what happened. So you don't read about these things in the textbooks today, but they are in the Museum of Anthropology at the University of California at Berkeley. They're not shown to the public. They're kept in a storage building several miles from the museum, but I have been in there to see them. I've seen them myself and studied them. And I've actually been out to the Sierra Nevada mountains and have relocated some of the 19th century gold mining tunnels where these things were originally discovered. And the kinds of artifacts that were discovered were stone mortars and pestles and obsidian spear points and things like that. And just recently, I've come across another case like that from Waldo, Oregon. It's in southwestern Oregon in Josephine County. Early in this is a case I'm going to be writing about in my new book. I'll just share it a little
thank you.
bit in advance with your listeners. But there was a very famous geologist, James Furman Kemp. He was a professor of geology at Columbia University in New York City, and he was also one of the founders of the Geological Society of America. And early in the 20th century, he was out doing some work in southwestern Oregon collecting mineral samples, and he heard about a discovery that had been made at the deep gravel mine near Waldo in Josephine County. So he went out there and he met one of the mine owners, William Jordan Weimer, and Mr. Weimer told Dr. Kemp about some discoveries that had been made at his mine. They had found mortars, stone mortars and pestles solidly embedded in layers of rock that date back to over 5 million years. So, pretty amazing discovery. And Dr. Kemp wrote in the magazine Science, which is one of the top science publications in America. He wrote, "I know these discoveries are controversial, especially in light of all the disputes about the California gold mine discoveries, but I feel these things have to be put on the record." So it's a case of, I would say, a pretty courageous scientist putting his neck on the line to publish something in a scientific journal about a discovery that really contradicted the dominant ideas about how old the human species is. Like I said, most scientists today would say humans like us are less than 200,000 years ago, and they don't think any humans like us were present in North America any earlier than about 20,000 years ago. So to have this evidence for a human presence in Oregon going back, 5 million years, and evidence in California going back over 50 million years, that's really quite extraordinary.
Yeah, that is extraordinary. It really is. And they're having a lot of little earthquakes over in that area now. Who knows? Things open up, they might even find more.
That's right. We'll have to see about that. Yeah, I live in Los Angeles, so sometimes we feel some shakes. Not the big one, I hope, but we do feel some shaking here from time to time. And I've also been hearing in Oklahoma they've been having earthquakes.
Yeah, it's been, there's some places that normally, I guess, wouldn't deal with something like that we're being told now, it doesn't matter where you are, it can happen. So, I know here in South Carolina, we've got so much rain. We had historical floods not long ago and all this rain, and I think that contributes to a lot. I mean, in some parts of the country, they're doing the fracking, and obviously they're pushing water in, and which I think becomes a lubricant, and then you get these platelets sliding and such, or these plates sliding. So, interesting stuff. We'll see what happens. Michael, hang on with us for a moment. We do have to take a break, and then people listening are asking about giants. Somebody said that actually giants were found in Wisconsin. Have there actually been real giants found?
That I'm sure they have been. I definitely accept that large-sized humans existed in the past, and by that I mean humans that would be 10 feet tall or taller, because there are lots of humans living today who are 7 feet tall. There's a few who are 8 feet tall. There's even one or two in the world who are 9 feet. But there's nobody 10 feet tall living. So just based on my whole belief system and everything that I've learned, I definitely think they've existed. But actually confirming that they existed in the sense of having human skeletal remains of large size that you can actually get your hands on and study and photograph and demonstrate is a little bit difficult, I would say. You see a lot of photographs on the web,
yeah.
But if you look into them, they're very difficult to confirm, and in some cases, the people who put them up have admitted that they're Photoshop hoaxes, basically. But I think there are some cases where you've got some scientific documentation, and I would say one of those cases came from early in the 20th century in France. There's a place in southern France where a French archaeologist of the name of Lapouge, L-A and then P-O-U-G-E, was conducting some research near a city called Mount Pellier, and there was a site called Castelnau, C-A-S-T-E-L-N-A-U, Castelnau, in southern France, where he uncovered skeletal remains, not of complete skeletons. He found thigh bones and upper arm bones, but they were of such a size, they were definitely human. But an anthropologist, a physical anthropologist, if they've got, say, for example, a thigh bone of a human that's been found, and they can measure it, they could tell you how tall the person would have had to have been to have a thigh bone that size. So photographs of these bones were published in a scientific publication, and it turned out that a human would have had to have been about 11 feet tall to have a thigh bone the size of the one that was found at Castelnau. So I think that's one of the better documented scientific cases of evidence for a large-sized or giant human that I've been able to see that might still be able to be located. I think it's a topic for research, would be to get somehow or other the current location of those bones and really verify them. And I think that would be important.
Well, I agree that verification is so important, and I'm glad you said that, because I've had people who will send me pictures, and you'll see the little Asian guy standing in the eye socket of this giant skull, and I say, okay, well, can you lead me down the trail as to who took this photo? I mean, let's get to the bottom of it, and they never can. Then they get mad because I'll say, hey, it's an interesting photo, but I can't confirm it. There's no way of proving it, and some people don't like that. And but that's really the way to do it. You have to confirm these things, and that goes about everything, doesn't it?
Well, at least in a couple of cases, you should be able to confirm it. Like myself, when I talk about those California gold mine discoveries, I actually I tracked down the museum where the artifacts are. I went through the whole bureaucratic process of getting access to them. They're not displayed to the public, but you can get permission to privately see them. And I went through the whole bureaucratic process of being able to do that, and I was able to personally study and photograph them. So I like being able to do that when I'm talking about evidence for extreme human antiquity. In the case of the evidence for giants, I would also like to be able, at least in one case, to personally verify the existence of these large-size human skeletal remains. And because just as you were saying, you often, I would also get sent pictures of large-size human skeletons. There was a very famous one that was circulating, and it still is circulating, of a large skeleton lying on the ground, and there are little human figures of archaeologists around it, with shovels and things like that. So I looked at the picture that was sent to me, and I could tell from the shadows that the sun was high and to the rear, and there was a little human figure standing behind the skull. And if it was real, he should have been casting a shadow on the top of the skull, but he wasn't casting a shadow. So that kind of clued me into this was a Photoshop job. Now, maybe people could be more expert in their Photoshop work and put in the shadows where they're supposed to be. That would be a step in the right direction. But as you say, if you actually try to track it down, where exactly was this made? Who exactly was involved in it? Now, as I say, I'm not saying that because I'm skeptical about giants existing. I definitely believe they did exist. As I was mentioning, I'm a student of the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, and they say that in the current age, living things, including humans, are smaller than they were thousands of years ago. So I'm really prepared to accept that thousands of years ago, living things, including human beings, were larger than they are today.
Well, yeah, if you had a mosquito back, so many millions of years ago that was the size of a Volvo or something, I mean, why wouldn't there be, everything? It's my understanding it had something to do with the oxygen content on the planet at that time, so everything was much bigger. Is that accurate?
That could be a reason, but I live in California, and in the mountains of California, you've got the California redwood trees, which are thousands of years old, some of them, 4,000 or more years old, and they're the biggest living things on Earth. So I think they're kind of holdovers from that previous age where things were bigger. And it's even just part of standard science that before 5,000 or 10,000 years ago, most animals were bigger than they are today. The bears were bigger, the beavers were bigger. Like beavers were 6 feet tall, and
wow,
like that. Or the deer, the elk were bigger, the elephants were bigger, the bears were bigger. That's part of standard science. So I think it's also possible that humans were also of larger size. And you see it in a lot of the different ancient wisdom traditions. In the Bible, you've got the story of Goliath, a big giant. In the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, it says in previous ages, things were bigger, humans were bigger. So I'm really prepared to accept that. But and I think a lot of the researchers into this whole topic of giants are going to admit also that it's very difficult to verify many of the reported cases.
Now, doesn't it mention giants in the scriptures? Is there a mention of giants or something with the Anunnaki too? I've heard with the giants.
Yeah, well, like I said, in the Bible, they talk about there were giants in the earth. There's the Goliath, who was a giant. There's and in the scriptures of ancient India, it mentions that in previous ages, humans were bigger than they are today. Mm-hmm. So I think you could probably find other examples in the scriptures of other traditions as well. But yeah, I definitely accept that they existed. But the reason in my book, Forbidden Archaeology, I didn't include a chapter on giants, is that although there are many reports of such things, quite credible reports, I had not been able to personally verify any of them, or at least one of them I would like to be able to verify.
Yeah, and of course when Anunnaki or giants come up, people always bring up Planet X too, so let me ask you, not necessarily a Planet X event, but there has been evidence in our past that has shown some major catastrophes on this planet that have pretty much wiped a good percentage of life out several times. Is that right?
Well, yes, and again, getting back to the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, they say there have been periodic catastrophes that have wiped out life on Earth, after which the Earth has had to have been repopulated. So, and that's part of standard science as well. Standard science says first terrestrial life began about 2 billion years ago, and they say since that time there have been 6 major extinction events that wiped out most of the living things on Earth. The last extinction event being the one that wiped out the dinosaurs about 65 million years ago. So you've got these 6 extinction events spaced at intervals of several hundred million years over that 2 billion year period. Now I find it's interesting that the ancient Sanskrit writings of India say that the most recent creation event, because they think there have been many creation events, but the most recent one began about 2 billion years ago. And since that time, there have been 6 major destructions or devastations that have taken place, because the concept of time in these ancient writings of India is cyclical. There are vast cycles of time, and one of the time cycles is called the Manvantar, and it lasts about 300 million years. And that means since the creation event 2 billion years ago, there have been 6 of these extinction events. So in this ancient wisdom tradition, it talks about 6 devastations that have taken place over the past 2 billion years, and modern science tells the same thing. 6 major extinction events that have taken place over the last couple billion years. Now, the way I think the Earth gets repopulated is it's something like cloud computing. Say you've got your smartphone or your computer and you're storing your files and pictures, songs and everything on the cloud. In other words, off your device, somewhere on some other system, so that if you lose or break your device, all your files and programs and songs and pictures are safe up in the cloud, and you get a new device and you can access the same files and programs and pictures and everything like that. So I think the universe is set up like that. We live in a multi-level cosmos where there are intelligent beings at higher levels of the cosmos, and they possess all the resources to reboot life on Earth if things happen to get wiped out here during one of these devastations or extinction events.
Yeah, I've often thought that when people bring up Noah's Ark, I would often refer to it as Noah's spaceship. It's almost like there's DNA and seed banks and all this, like it's all off planet. Just in case something happens, they can come back and reseed. sometimes I wonder if there's not some who are behind. We get so far to say, okay, well, they've woken up too much. They've got too smart to us. So let's wipe them out and start over again. JJ says, can you ask your guest if he feels there could have been a Mars-Earth connection? Could humans be related to some ancient Mars species?
Yes, I think in principle that's possible. In one sense, I think we're all extraterrestrials in this sense. We have to understand what a human being is. Now, most scientists today would say that a human being or any other living thing is just a machine made of molecules, a machine made of matter. But I think there's more to it than that. I think our bodies made of molecules and chemical elements like calcium, phosphorus, iron, and all that, they are just vehicles for a conscious self, which is non-material. I don't think matter produces consciousness, as many scientists do today. They think that the chemicals in the brain produce consciousness. I don't accept that. I think the conscious self has its own independent existence. It comes from some higher level of reality, and it can become covered by matter, but it's not produced by matter. This is something I talk about in my book, Human Devolution. The basic idea there is, as conscious selves, we don't evolve up from matter. Rather, we come down or devolve from a level of pure consciousness, or spirit, if you like that word. So I would say, as conscious selves, none of us are from this Earth planet. We're all from some higher extraterrestrial level of reality. And according to the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, there are 400,000 human-like species scattered throughout the entire universe. All the celestial bodies are inhabited. So sure, there could be connections between human-like beings on Mars and humans on Earth, or from other parts of the cosmos or other levels of the cosmos. That may not be exactly what the questioner was thinking, but those are my thoughts on the matter. And another interesting thing is, I sometimes speak at archaeology conferences of professional archaeologists, and sometimes even the professional mainstream archaeologists are beginning to talk about extraterrestrial archaeology, which I find quite fascinating. So, no, I don't think what the questioner was proposing is outlandish or impossible. I think it's very possible.
Well, I got to say, I find it very fascinating, too. Other planets and artifacts that I have a couple very reliable people. You're in this business for a little while. You meet people who you can trust. And well, I've got a couple of those people when it comes to Mars and things, and they go through NASA's photos. It's like it's their life mission to go through these photos and find things. And I'll tell you, they send me some pretty interesting stuff that would, I would have to link some of that. I mean, Earth and Mars, I would see a connection because I've been shown pyramids. I've been shown what looks like faces and even machine parts on the ground, and of course I'm not there, so I can't say for sure, but you blow these things up and they sure as heck look legitimate. So I think there's a lot more on the Mars, on Moon, on these places than what they're telling us. And I think that we'd find, if like you and I could go there right now, I'll dig, for you, if that's what we got to do. If we can go there and really look for ourselves, I think we would find that there was probably a time when there was regular, bus trips going back and forth.
Yeah, and I just find it interesting that even in professional archaeological circles, they're beginning to talk about these things. they're beginning to wonder, okay, when we go back to the moon, when we go to Mars and we encounter things, what are we going to do with them? Whose museum are they going to go into? They're actually starting to make treaties about these things through the United Nations and things like that. Of course, one thing they're talking about is stuff that we've sent up there ourselves. You know, Russia and the United States and other countries have sent stuff out there. So one thing they're talking about is that. But I was at a meeting of the World Archaeological Congress, and some of the archaeologists in one of the sections of the conference were talking about, what if we run into stuff that we didn't send up there? What if we find on the surface of one of these planets or moons stuff that we did not send? Or what if we find in Earth orbit a satellite that we didn't put up, but came from some other part of the solar system or the universe? What are we going to do then? So these things are actually being discussed in the professional circles as well as on programs like this.
Well, and it's good that they are discussing it, because I think it needs to be, because that possibility is great. That, you know, I understand that even in the astronauts' handbook or whatever it is they give them, one of the things that they're told is, I guess they're given directions on how to react should they come in contact with extraterrestrials while in space. And I guess my question would be is, how does anybody know how you should act? So quite interesting, to say the least. Now, I've got a couple more questions here about giants, so I'll give you those first, so we're not too far off of that topic. Did the Inca nation ever mention six-fingered giants in their runes or pyramids?
Well, sometimes I just have to say I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. That question. Maybe one of your other guests would have a better idea. I would guess that, you know, somebody, maybe like Peter Forster or someone, Brian Forster, excuse me, who does research in Peru, he might know the answer to a question like that.
Oh, okay. All right. And let's see. We've got MM, and he says, do giants have 2 rows of teeth and any photos of skulls with them?
That is one thing that I've heard reports about. There's published reports that in the 19th century, large-sized human skeletons with skulls with 2 rows of teeth were found. I haven't myself seen photos of them or any specimens of them. Doesn't mean they don't exist, but I'm just aware of the reports, but I haven't been able to personally verify them myself, nor do I know that anyone else has been able to do it, although I may be wrong about that.
Okay, and we've got Glenn. Glenn says, how far advanced in the past might humans have gotten? He says, say, industrial stage, if not further, and could they have, like the old saying goes, and blew themselves back to the Stone Age?
Well, you know, the Greek philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, said that human civilizations have risen and fallen many times in the past. And my own spiritual teacher, I'm a disciple of a guru from India, Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and he wrote in his books that we have a level of industrial and technological society today, and he said this has happened many times in the past. But I don't know if, you know, of course, it all depends upon what you mean by advanced. You know, some people's concept of advancement is leading a simple, natural, peaceful life, with as few possessions as possible. So by that definition, our current society, with all its environmental destruction and air pollution and water pollution and conflict and economic crises and social disturbances surrounded with all this technology and development and the warfare and everything like that, they might not consider it so advanced.
I see. Okay. And another question here before we hit the final break here. Let's see. Why is it thought that a jawbone found in Ethiopia may be one of the first human beings? I don't know if you know about that. Jawbone found in Ethiopia?
Well, scientists, I am aware of some discoveries like that. And the problem is that scientists today, they use the word human in a very loose way. They use it to include creatures that, if you looked at them, would be hard to distinguish from an ape or a monkey. But they think they are human ancestors. So many times when they talk about these things, they're not referring to something that we would consider, human, that you would recognize as human if you saw one of these creatures walking down the street. So in Ethiopia, some time ago, they found something like this. But actually there have been human jaws that are fully human that have been found that go back millions of years. So one of them was found at a place called Miramar in Argentina early in the 20th century. So that was a genuine case of a jawbone that actually was anatomically modern human and millions of years old. So the one that was found in Ethiopia, in my opinion, is not really human. It's only human in the imaginations of the scientists who think that human beings evolved from apes and monkeys.
Yeah, and again, I can't believe that we're still teaching that in schools. I know my kids know the truth because I tell them, and that is that, if your teacher tells you that we came from monkeys, ask them where that missing link is, and ask them why in 2016, when we could scan all kinds of places throughout the earth, and ask them why, how come we still haven't found it? Or, what, obviously, just like the junk DNA thing, I've never believed that there's junk DNA. With such an intelligent creation, and that is everything, not just this earth, but everything within the universe, it all has some kind of purpose, for existence. And, with that type of intelligence, I could just never believe it's that. I mean, that's like, there's extra parts here. Let me just throw it in there and sew them up. It's never set well with me.
Yeah, about this Ethiopia jaw, I wrote about it in one of my columns for Atlantis Rising magazine. I have a column that appears in every edition of that magazine. My column is called The Forbidden Archaeologist, and it was in Atlantis Rising issue number 112, which came out last year. I wrote a whole article about that Ethiopia jaw, and as I said, the main problem with it is it's not really human. It's like the jaw of an ape or a monkey. But because scientists believe humans evolved from the apes and monkeys, they called it first human, but not really.
I see. All right, Michael, we're going to take our last break here.
Well, let me just talk about some principles. The
Sure.
principle first that there are intelligent forms of life elsewhere in the cosmos, extraterrestrials. Yes, I accept that. And you could call them whatever, angels, Anunnaki, gene, whatever. So I think there are intelligent human-like creatures scattered throughout the universe, and they have something to do with our human presence here. And as I mentioned a little bit earlier in the show, as conscious selves, I think we're all extraterrestrials. We're not from the world of matter. So sometimes we talk about, Michael Vera has talked about the idea of seeds. I think the real seed is the soul, the conscious self.
Yeah.
So this world of matter has been seeded with souls, and those souls require vehicles to function on this level of reality. Those vehicles we call bodies. So where did those bodies come from? I think they come from higher intelligences in the cosmos who understand that if a conscious self is going to function in the world of matter, it needs a vehicle made of matter in which to function here. So those vehicles are provided for us. So what we do with the vehicles, that's up to us. I would say you could use the vehicle for two purposes. The first purpose and the best purpose would be to use the vehicle of the human body to elevate consciousness back to its original pure state, beyond the world of matter. Everything in the world of matter is temporary. Things are coming into existence and going out of existence. They're taking birth, they're dying. But the real nature of the soul, the conscious self, is beyond that. It belongs at a level of reality beyond the world of matter. So the most important or best use of the human vehicle would be to use it to elevate consciousness to its original pure state, beyond the world and limitations of matter. Now, you can also use the human vehicle to enslave yourself to matter, to get involved in domination, control, exploiting, competition, environmental destruction, endless warfare. And that way, you become a slave of matter. So, but that's not because of any higher power dictating that. That's our own choice. So we have the choice, I believe, to use our human vehicle to liberate ourselves from the world of matter, or we can use the human vehicle to enslave ourselves to matter and material competition. So it's a choice that we each have to make ourselves. I don't think it's something that's necessarily imposed on us.
Do you suppose that our ancient ancestors, no matter how far back, do you think if they had psychic powers and such, then they had to be aware that this physical plane wasn't it, that there was more before and more after than their existence here?
Well, I think that choice has always been there for humans, whether it's in modern times or in ancient times. I think ultimately there is a source of all conscious beings. You could call it God. And I think that source of all conscious beings has always been trying to tell people on this level of reality, either by coming himself or sending his representatives to give people that key bit of knowledge that this world is not your real home. you have a real home on the spiritual level of reality, and that's what you should be striving for. And I think you can see that in all the great spiritual traditions of the world. If you really get down to the root of them, they're actually saying that. So I would say yes, from the very beginning of time, that message has been given to us, and it's still being given even today. The question is, are we going to act on it or not?
True. And so what would you, and I love asking these questions to people who have done so much research like yourself, what would you say our purpose is here? Now, obviously, the obvious thing is to gain knowledge, but why are we here? I mean, how come we don't know? I imagine we're supposed to, but how come we don't know? I mean, when we're born, we have no knowledge of past lives or spiritual worlds or any of that. All this stuff is kind of taught or experienced.
Well, I think you're right about all those things. About the ultimate reason, of course, it's the ultimate question. Why are we here? And I think it's because we're not fit to exist at this moment. If we're here, that means we're not fit to exist on that higher level of reality, which I call the level of pure consciousness. You could call it the spiritual world if you want to put it in more theological terms, but I call it the realm of pure consciousness, because the ruling principle of that realm of pure consciousness is loving harmony among all conscious selves and the source of all conscious beings as well. If a conscious self becomes egotistical, selfish, domineering, controlling, exploiting, then it can no longer exist in that harmonious state. There has to be some other place for such conscious selves, and that's where we find ourselves. So now we have a choice. We can either act in such a way as to elevate ourselves to that higher level of reality, or we can get ourselves more and more deeply entangled in this material level of reality, which is ruled by things such as greed, envy, violence, and things like that. So it's a choice that's always being presented to us, and there are different wisdom traditions that offer ways to elevate the conscious self to its original pure state. And everyone has to make up their mind which path is most suitable for them. But as a general principle, I would say we all should make the right choices. And the reason we're here is because we're not making the right choices.
So you seem like a pretty good guy to me. So,
Well, but I accept. I think the first part of being a good guy, in one sense, is to accept I'm responsible for my actions. Just like if somebody is in prison, then they have to recognize where they are. They're not where they want to be. You want to be free. You want to be part of the normal society. And if you're not in the normal society, there's a reason for it. And you're being offered an opportunity to correct yourself and make yourself fit. So I would say to myself, if I'm here, it's because of something or some attitude that I have that makes me not fit to be in that higher level of pure consciousness or spirit. And therefore, it's up to me to correct myself. or take advantage of the offers for correction that are being presented to me. Now, that I also accept that there could be persons on this level of reality who aren't here for the same reason that I'm here. Sometimes spiritual personalities come from that higher level of reality just out of compassion and mercy, and to teach and to help people on this level of reality. They're not here, just like there may be a counselor in the prison who's not in the prison because they've committed a crime. They're there because it's their job to help people.
Yeah, that would make sense too, and it's all fascinating to think about. And then, of course, it brings me to those who tell me about reincarnation, and I
believe in reincarnation.
So then that must mean that we're still not getting it right, so we have to come back and do it again?
Well, the way that I look at it is, if you're trying to do the right thing and maybe you get 5% along the path, then you die and you'll start out at 5%. You don't lose whatever progress you made, but you've got an opportunity to add to it. And it may take many lifetimes, but if you keep making progress, you'll eventually make it.
So we're pretty much, we're going to keep collecting gold stars until we get the proper amount to move on to the next plane. Is that it then?
That's what I would say.
Okay.
That's my conviction. Yes. And I think there's some evidence for it. There have been psychiatrists like Dr. Ian Stevenson, the late Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia Medical School, who've studied past life memories reported by young children. Children, in many cases, report having a previous life. And Dr. Ian Stevenson and his colleagues did very detailed studies of thousands of these children, and in hundreds of cases they were able to verify the existence of the personality the child claimed to have been in the past life after detailed study. So it's not only a conviction that I have, but it's something that I think there's a great deal of evidence for. And I think everybody sometimes has a feeling, I've been through this before, I've been here before. I think a great many people have these kinds of sensations or feelings. And some people have even detailed memories of past lives.
Yeah, that's true. And I don't know about you, but I've had paranormal experiences. So for me, I can't explain it. Some say, well, it could be other dimensions, other worlds. It could be a lot of things. But whatever it is, I know it's different than what's here, than what we are here, and it exists. And so I'm wondering, have you ever had any kind of experiences like that? There's something that's told you, doesn't matter, you don't need to find the evidence physically because you've experienced it, it's real.
Yeah, I've had a couple of experiences like that. One was when I was in the Navy in the late 1960s. I was sent to a weather station in Iceland. A lot of people were being sent to Vietnam, but I was sent to a weather station in Iceland. And once in the wintertime there, I went out camping in the mountains of Iceland with some friends of mine. And we were camped at the base of a small mountain. It's not like Mount Everest or something, but a small mountain, a couple thousand feet high. And we just got this idea, well, let's go out, and it was the middle of the night, and race up to the top of this mountain. So there were three of us, and we started racing up the top of this mountain. I was kind of climbing up over the ice and the rocks and everything. Got almost to the top, slipped, and fell down on my back and started sliding down the mountain on my back, and I couldn't stop. And I was thinking about all the rocks I'd climbed over. You know, my skull's gonna get smashed open. I'm gonna go over a cliff, or at a certain point, I just mentally let go, and I experienced myself outside my body, watching my body go down the slope of that mountain in the moonlight, and then I just blacked out, and you know, my buddies kind of woke me up. I was in a snowdrift at the bottom of the mountain, and they said the only way you could have survived is the way that you came down, you know, that mountain. And it was something that, you know, like I said, I believe I'm a conscious self, that I'm something different from the body, but in that case, I actually experienced it. Yeah. And there was another kind of paranormal experience I had. Once I was speaking at a conference in Montreal, Canada, and Stephen Schwartz, who was one of the people that was involved in the remote viewing work that was conducted by, you know, the U.S. government in the 1970s. You know, he was part of the Stanford Research Institute that did remote viewing work for the government. And he was doing a seminar at this conference on remote viewing, and I went to it. You know, I was giving my lectures about forbidden archaeology, but I thought, okay, let me check this out. So he did a little exercise. There were about 100 of us in this room in this hotel in Montreal, and he picked a couple of people, and he told them, go out, get in the car, drive anywhere you want in the city, and then when you get to that place, stay there for 15 minutes. I'm going to give you a camera, a video camera. I want you to videotape the place. And I also want you to try to mentally project the imagery of the place back to us here in the hotel. So the people left. You know, they drove somewhere for 15 minutes. And then after 15 minutes, Stephen Schwartz asked us to clear our minds, you know, those of us who were still in the hotel, and try to pick up the imagery that these people were sending mentally. So I did that, and he asked us to write it down, and, you know, the first image that came into my mind was candle flames in red glass holders. And then he asked, what do you see when you look up, when you look to the right, to the left? I wrote it all down. It seemed like a cathedral or something. So after some time, the people came back from wherever they'd gone. They put the videotape into the player, and the first image that came up was candle flames in red glass holders. I mean, I had nailed it. I'd gotten it exactly right. And although I was really resisting it mentally, I thought mentally I was convinced they'd gone to a bowling alley. But you know, Stephen Schwartz said to us, don't try to analyze what's in your head. Don't try to argue with yourself about it. Just whatever it is, write it down. So I did that. So that was pretty amazing.
That is amazing. That is amazing. Wow. All right. Well,
yeah, I have had a few little psychic experiences.
Well, yeah, and that's what I wish everybody can have, these types of experiences, because you know, they wouldn't question so much. Even though I've had experiences that I have, and I know, I want to know more. So I mean, I dwell in as deep as I can, but you know, I mean, I've come close to death, and not too long ago, as a matter of fact. And you know what? I wasn't afraid. I knew there was, you know, it's not that I wanted to check out or anything, but I wasn't afraid. I know there's something else, and you know, I just, the thing with me though is I'm not big on surprises. I like to kind of know what I'm getting into. So, you know, hopefully one day technology will catch up. I don't know if that'll be a good or bad thing, but maybe it'll catch up, and we'll be able to communicate with that other side. Definitely communicate with that other side without any doubt. So, well, now, Michael, you took a trip to Cambodia, and I think an ancient temple that you visited, and there was some huge stone carvings and such depicting different historical events. And I was wondering if you could share a little bit of that with us.
Well, that was last year. I was on my way to India, and I thought I'd stop off in Cambodia because I'd always wanted to see the Angkor Wat temple, which is it's considered one of the biggest Vishnu temples in the world. But it's not. It was built about 1,000 years ago, and the reason I was interested in it is that this huge temple complex has a lot of cosmological and astronomical data built into the structure of the temple, showing that these people had advanced astronomical knowledge. So that's the main reason I wanted to go there. So, I landed in Bangkok, Thailand, and then I took a flight from Bangkok to Angkor Wat. And I stayed there a few days, and I visited the temple, and it was very amazing. One thing that I found interesting is it had the Vedic cosmological time cycles built into the structure of the temple. According to the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, there's a cycle of 4 ages that repeats again and again and again. And the ages have certain lengths: 432,000 years, 864,000 years, which is twice the first one, and then 3 times that, 1,296,000 years, and then 4 times the original one, 1,726,000 years, something like that. I think those are the figures. And those numbers are built into the structure of the temple. There's an entrance bridge that's the unit of measurement in the temple is a cubit. That's actually a biblical measurement also, okay. A cubit. And there's an entrance bridge that goes across the moat. It's 432 cubits long. Then there's a long causeway that goes from the end of that bridge to the entrance to the main temple complex, and that's 864 cubits long. So it was interesting that all this cosmological data was built into the structure of the temple, so that the temple was actually like a model of the universe. So it's amazing. Like some Christian cathedrals are like that too. They have a lot of astronomical and astrological elements built into them, and they're like models of the cosmos. So I find that kind of thing fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. Now, let me ask you this, and I've got a few more questions from listeners that I'll get to in just a second before we're done here. With all your vast work in the field of archaeology and all the other areas that you've been in, what have you concluded to this point of, say, Earth, the human race, the paranormal, our friends in space? How does it all come together for you so far? And of course, I'm sure you know that, or you feel like you don't have all the answers, but based on what you know so far, you've got a hell of a lot more than most people. The answers, that is.
Yeah. Well, where I put a lot of this all together, the archaeology, the paranormal, the extraterrestrial, and all of that, is in my book, Human Devolution, a Vedic alternative to Darwin's theory. And the basic message that I get out of that is that as conscious selves, we have not evolved up from matter, as most scientists now believe. Rather, we've devolved or come down from a higher level of reality. And the main purpose of human life is to restore consciousness to its original pure state, back on that higher level of reality that I call the level of pure consciousness. That's very difficult to do in this present age because there's, the people in charge of the education system are extremely materialistic. They give us extremely materialistic answers to the fundamental questions. Who are we and where did we come from? They say, well, we're just machines made of molecules. We're just evolved apes. We're purely material beings, and we should just have no other interest than to just work hard and produce and consume more and more material things for the benefits of the people who are actually running the whole economic, political, and financial system. And I think that's sad, but I think somehow or other, whether it means going against the flow or not, we've got to each individually put some effort into raising our consciousness. And I think that's the real purpose of human life.
I agree. All right. JJ wants to know if you can ask one more question. Sure, JJ. How about disclosure? Will we have it soon on the ET presence? What do you think of that?
I think very little has been disclosed so far, and I think it's interesting that the chief of staff of the Obama administration, a man named Robert, I think Podesta, 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 he was the chief of staff of the White House in the Obama administration. He said to the press that one of the things that they were most disappointed about is they weren't able to get disclosure about the ET information. I thought that was a pretty interesting statement to come from a high government official. So maybe it is coming, but it's not there yet.
Right. Right, and some people don't like my answer. My answer is, if you're talking about disclosure in general, I think we've already got it. If you're waiting for somebody, a politician, to come out, and especially one on the level of president, to come out and say, "Hey, guess what? We're not alone." There's a part of me that doesn't know if I'll see that day. Not that I won't see the day that aliens actually land and say hello, but I don't think you'll see they're going to come up with some kind of excuse so it don't look as though they've lied all these years. They've got to always cover their butts, I think. So, okay. Tree of Life asks, what does the guest think of the pyramids, or think that the pyramids served? As when they were, he wants to know what you think the pyramids, what their purpose was.
Okay, it's a good question. I have to confess, I'm not an expert on pyramids. Alternative history is a big field. There's a lot of different topics to deal with. My research is concentrated on archaeological evidence for extreme human antiquity, evidence showing that humans like us have been around for more than 200,000 years. So my knowledge about the pyramids is just gained from being a person who hears a lot of these topics that other researchers have been involved in. Like Mr. Dunn, he believes they were some kind of energy generators or collectors, and others have different ideas about them. So because I'm really not an expert about the pyramids, I don't have any very, very developed ideas about them. I have heard the other ideas that other researchers have been proposing. I would guess, just from my own point of view, that they have something to do with reincarnation. I think there are texts like the Egyptian Book of the Dead that show that the ancient Egyptian people had a developed concept of an afterlife. So I would think they'd be kind of connected with that. But maybe they also had other functions as well. But as I said, I'm not all that well informed about everything that has to do with the pyramids.
Well, this particular listener mentions ionizing the atmosphere, so I don't know if it would be used for something like that. I mean, one can only guess. I mean, when it comes down to it, they obviously had served some purpose, because they're all over the planet, these pyramids, and they seem to be on other planets too, based on what I've seen. So they serve some kind of special privilege of some sort. Maggie asks, doesn't tell me, actually nobody's been telling me where they're from, but that's okay. When was the last mass extinction?
Well, according to modern science, it was about 65 million years ago when they say a comet hit the Earth and caused a mass extinction event. According to the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, it would have been about 120 million years ago when there was a global devastation, kind of like a cosmic flood. So, but in either case, many millions of years ago was the last big extinction event. According to the ancient Sanskrit writings of India, the next cosmic flood devastation event is going to be in about 180 million years. So,
well, that's a long time.
Yeah, a long time.
It's very long. You know how many people are disappointed tonight because they're like, what? I'm not going to drown. The world's not going to end. Some people, they live for the end, I guess. All right. So John in Tennessee wants to know he says, does Mr. Cremo know what the causes of mass extinctions was? And you just said, flood, obviously. And I guess, anything you can imagine probably could happen, right?
Yeah, as I said, scientists believe that the last big one was caused by a celestial object, some kind of comet or huge meteor hitting the Earth. And then the information that I get from the ancient Sanskrit writings of India is that there are cosmic floods that wipe out life on Earth. And that's also in other wisdom traditions as well, the Bible, the Sumerian text, and others. Scientists might also have other different ideas like volcanic events, that might block, send huge amounts of ash into the sky and block the sun rays and, result in a drastic drop in world temperatures. So, and then I think some have proposed near misses by huge celestial objects like of planetary size that, cross the Earth's orbit. So I guess there's a lot of different ideas about it from different sources. The sources that I find most credible are the ancient Sanskrit writings of India. They propose cosmic floods.
Okay. A couple comments here. Chris in Oklahoma, I think that is. Frankly, I think a Neanderthal could function in society today. Your guest thoughts?
As I mentioned a little bit earlier in the show, I would be prepared to say the Neanderthals are practically human. There's been research done suggesting that they buried their dead, they observed rituals for the dead, that they had elaborate cooking, they mated with humans, In other words, in my new book that I'm working on now, I'm going to propose that they should be considered a subspecies of Homo sapiens, not a separate species, because I think they're more human-like than scientists originally believed.
Okay. And Anna, she's in the UK. She hits us often, almost just probably 3 or 4 times a week, and we appreciate it. Neanderthal did survive, she says, just not as a separate species. Check the DNA; it's in there. Thank you, great show. So that's all she wanted to say. So I would imagine that, everything we need to find out probably is in the DNA. And I think that's some of it they call junk. And again, I don't think it's junk DNA. Kathy in Rochester, Minnesota. And thank you, people, for telling me where you're hitting us from. Mr. Cremo, have you come across any evidence, we kind of covered this too, for past passings of Planet X or Nibiru?
That is an idea that comes from Zecharia Sitchin. And, different researchers working in the alternative history field have different sources of inspiration. His main source of inspiration was the Sumerian text of ancient India, and I think that's where he got the name Nibiru. And my main source of inspiration was the ancient Vedic text of India, which don't talk about that, although they do talk of periodic devastations that affect the earth, which is something that is connected with this idea of a Planet X or Nibiru also. So I guess it would just depend upon, I'm not opposed in principle to there being undiscovered planets that sometimes approach the Earth's orbit, but it's not part of my basic set of assumptions.
Okay, I understand that. And Michael, I want to give you the floor to get out anything that you'd like. And I thank you so much for being with us. I really enjoy talking with you, and I think that the research that you do and the information that you share with people, again, I'll say it is priceless. This is what it's all about, knowledge. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just leave it with this. My most recent published book is called My Science, My Religion. It's a collection of 24 papers that I've presented about the kinds of things we've been talking about this evening at major international scientific conferences. Many people are surprised that I'm able to do that. So if anybody's interested in seeing how I present these things to scientific audiences, they could have a look at that book. And there's a special offer that anyone who purchases the book from my website, mcremo.com, will also receive a free copy of Bhagavad Gita, which is one of the central texts of ancient India's spiritual wisdom. Mahatma Gandhi would read this book, Bhagavad Gita. So if anyone gets a copy of My Science, My Religion from my website, mcremo.com, mcremo.com, they'll also receive as a free gift from me a copy of Bhagavad Gita.
All right. Fantastic. Well, Michael, thank you so much, and I look forward to the next time. We mustn't make it so long. It's just a fascinating bunch of topics, and your books are fantastic, and I recommend them highly. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Michael.
All right. Have a great night, my friend.
Good night.
All right, good night. All right, everybody, there he goes, Michael Cremo.
Thank you for listening to the first hour of Late Night in the Midlands. To finish listening to this episode, go to lnmradionetwork.com and become a subscriber. Becoming a subscriber is easy. There is a link on every page to take you to the subscription page. The cost is low, and you would be supporting Late Night in the Midlands and all of our efforts to bring you the truth. Again, go to lnmradionetwork.com, click on the subscribe button, and you can finish listening to this episode as well as all of the other shows that are in our archives.